Matthew sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty suitcase Elena had left on the floor. The soft hum of the central heating was the only sound in the house, apart from the distant giggles of Olivia and Ethan playing in the living room. It had been 4 days since Elena left for her conference in New York, her absence more noticeable this time than ever before. It wasn't just the fact that she was away, it was how she left. Her goodbye kiss had felt rushed, almost obligatory. The way she avoided his eyes when she said she'd be busy made his stomach churn. They had been together for 11 years, and while every marriage had its seasons, he couldn't ignore the storm clouds gathering over theirs. It started small: missing dinner dates, hushed phone calls late at night, the faint scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't his. Matthew had tried to brush off his suspicions, chalking it up to her demanding job in public relations. But 2 weeks ago he found a receipt tucked in her handbag for a dinner for two at a restaurant they'd never visited together. When he asked her about it, Elena had waved it off, saying it was a work dinner with her boss, Adrian. Adrian! The name felt like a thorn in Matthew's side. He'd never met the man, but heard enough about him to form an unflattering picture. Charismatic, confident, and always at the center of Elena's stories. Adrian thinks this campaign will be groundbreaking. Adrian pushed us to innovate. It wasn't just the way she spoke of him, it was the way her eyes lit up when she did. Now, sitting in the dimly lit bedroom they once shared so intimately, Matthew felt a knot of unease tightening in his chest. He grabbed his phone and opened the calendar. Her conference at the Sapphire Heights Hotel was scheduled to end in 3 days. 3 days of wondering, of imagining her with Adrian, of questioning if his suspicions were unfounded or painfully accurate. That night he lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the window. Sleep wouldn't come. He kept picturing her laughter, her smile, but with someone else. By the time the sun rose, he had made a decision. The drive to New York was long, giving Matthew plenty of time to second-guess himself. He told himself it was a romantic gesture, a surprise visit to rekindle their strained connection, but deep down he knew it was something else. He needed to see her, to confirm whether his fears were real or a product of his overactive imagination. Sapphire Heights Hotel was a towering monument of luxury, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the bustling streets below. Matthew parked in the nearby garage and entered the lobby, his heart pounding. The air smelled of fresh lilies and polished wood, the hum of quiet conversations filling the space. "Good evening," the receptionist greeted with a warm smile. "How may I assist you?" "I'm looking for my wife," Matthew said, forcing a smile. "Elena Vaughn. She's staying here for a conference." The receptionist's fingers danced across the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose guest information." "Of course," Matthew replied, retreating to a plush armchair in the corner of the lobby. He waited, his eyes scanning every passing face, his mind racing with scenarios he wished he could ignore. An hour later, he saw her. Elena walked into the lobby, her laughter echoing like a melody, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man, tall, impeccably dressed, with an easy charm that Matthew could sense even from a distance. Adrian. They stopped at the concierge desk, their conversation too quiet to hear. Matthew watched as Adrian's hand lightly touched the small of Elena's back, guiding her toward the elevator. Matthew stood, torn between confronting them and walking away. He chose neither. Instead, he followed. The elevator doors closed before he could reach them, but the light above indicated their destination, the 14th floor. Matthew took the stairs, his pulse quickening with each step. When he reached the hallway, he saw them at the far end, standing outside his suite. Adrian leaned in, saying something that made Elena laugh, her hand brushing his arm. Matthew's world tilted. He approached slowly, each step heavy with dread. Before he reached them, Adrian disappeared into the suite, leaving Elena alone in the hallway. "Elena!" Matthew called out. She turned, her face a mask of shock. Matthew, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his voice tight, "but I think I already know." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me," he demanded, his voice rising. "I can't do this here," she stammered. "Come inside." Inside the suite, the air was thick with tension. Elena closed the door behind them, her hands trembling. "Matthew, please," she began, her voice breaking. "You have to believe me." "Believe what?" he snapped. "That you're here, with another man, that you've been lying to me for months?" Tears streamed down her face. "I never lied to you. Adrian and I, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Matthew scoffed. "That's your excuse?" "He's been a friend," she insisted. "Someone I could talk to when I felt alone." "You weren't alone," Matthew shot back. "You had me." "But you weren't there," Elena shouted, her voice raw with emotion. "You've been so wrapped up in work and the kids that you didn't even notice I was drowning." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "So what? You turn to him? Is that how you solve our problems?" "I didn't sleep with him," she said quietly. Matthew's jaw clenched. "Do you expect me to believe that?" "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze, "because it's the truth. That is amazing." The drive home was silent, the air in the car heavy with unspoken words. Elena stared out the window, her face pale and tear-streaked. Matthew gripped the wheel tightly, his mind racing. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Matthew got out without a word and headed inside. Elena followed, but he didn't wait for her. He went straight to the bedroom, closing the door behind him. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. How had it come to this? Over the next few weeks, their home became a battlefield of resentment and regret. They fought often, their arguments filled with accusations and defensiveness. But amidst the anger, there were moments of vulnerability, glimpses of the love they once shared. One night, Elena suggested therapy. "We need help, Matthew," she said. "If we don't fix this, we'll lose everything." Matthew hesitated. The idea of laying bare their pain to a stranger felt unbearable, but the thought of losing Elena, of losing their family, was worse. "All right," he said finally, "let's do it." Their therapist, Dr. Louise Harper, was a calm and empathetic woman who quickly honed in on their issues. "Elena," she asked during their first session, "why did you turn to Adrian?" Elena hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore." "And Matthew?" Dr. Harper said. "How do you feel about that?" Matthew exhaled deeply. I feel like I failed her, but I also feel betrayed. Like she gave up on me instead of telling me how she felt." Their sessions were grueling, forcing them to confront the cracks in their marriage. But slowly, they began to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. As the weeks passed, therapy became both a lifeline and a battlefield for Matthew and Elena. Each session peeled back layers of resentment, guilt, and unspoken pain. For Matthew, the process was like reconstructing a building whose foundation had been shaken to its core. For Elena, it was a journey of facing her own mistakes and understanding why she had allowed her bond with Adrian to take root. But outside the therapist's office, life carried on. Olivia and Ethan needed their parents, unaware of the fractures in the structure they depended on. Their bright smiles and eager stories about school reminded Matthew of the stakes. One evening, Olivia approached Matthew as he sat in the living room flipping through a stack of old family photo albums. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" she asked, her voice quiet but pointed. Matthew's throat tightened. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" Olivia shrugged, but her frown betrayed her worry. "You and Mom don't talk as much anymore, and you're always so quiet." For a moment, Matthew was at a loss for words. "Your mom and I are working through some grown-up stuff," he said gently. "But I promise we love you and Ethan very much. That's never going to change." Her small arms wrapped around his neck, and he held her close, his heart heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Elena, too, felt the children's growing awareness. One night, while tucking Ethan into bed, he blurted, "Mommy, are you mad at Daddy?" The innocence of his question brought tears to her eyes. "No, sweetie," she said, brushing his hair back. "I'm not mad at Daddy. Sometimes grown-ups just have to work harder to be happy." Ethan's face scrunched in thought. "You and Daddy should do happy things together, like when we go to the zoo." Elena forced a smile. "That's a good idea," she said, kissing his forehead. Later that night, she brought up the idea of a family outing to Matthew. "We need to show them we're still a team," she said. Matthew hesitated but eventually agreed. For them, he said, though a part of him hoped it might also help bridge the gap between them. The zoo trip was surprisingly successful. Olivia and Ethan raced from exhibit to exhibit, their laughter infectious. At one point, Matthew found himself smiling as he watched Elena help Ethan climb onto a statue of a bronze lion. She caught his eye, and for a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissolve. "You're smiling," she teased as they walked behind the kids. "Maybe I forgot how," he replied, his tone lighter than it had been in weeks. Elena's hand brushed against his, and though he didn't take it, the gesture stayed with him. But progress was never linear. 2 days later, Matthew received a call from Alan Gray, the private investigator he had hired weeks earlier. "I've got something you need to see," Alan said, his voice grim. Matthew's stomach dropped. He met Alan at a small cafe where the investigator handed him a manila folder filled with photos. "I trailed Adrian after your wife left his firm," Alan explained. "Turns out, he's been trying to contact her." Matthew's hands shook as he flipped through the images of Adrian standing outside a flower shop, holding a bouquet. Another photo showed him leaving a post office with an envelope in hand. "Did he try to see her?" Matthew asked. Alan shook his head. "Not yet, but he's definitely not done with her." The folder felt heavier than it should have. Matthew left the cafe, his mind spinning with questions. That evening, he confronted Elena. "Did Adrian send you anything?" he asked, placing the folder on the kitchen counter. Elena froze. "What is this?" "Photos," Matthew said curtly. "Of Adrian. Of him buying flowers, sending letters. Is he still trying to be a part of your life?" Elena's face flushed with anger and shame. "I haven't spoken to him since I left the firm," she said. "And no, I haven't received anything from him." "Then why does it feel like he's still in the middle of our marriage?" Matthew snapped. "Because you won't let him go," Elena shot back. "I've done everything I can to prove to you that I'm committed to us. When will it be enough?" Matthew stared at her, his chest heaving. He wanted to believe her, but the wounds were still fresh, and trust felt like an impossible bridge to rebuild. Dr. Harper addressed the confrontation during their next therapy session. "Elena, how did it feel to be confronted with the photos?" she asked. "Like I was being accused all over again," Elena said, her voice trembling. "I've done everything to cut ties with Adrian, but it's like Matthew can't see that." "And Matthew," Dr. Harper continued, "why did you feel the need to confront Elena in that way?" Matthew hesitated. "Because I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared that I'll never fully trust her again. Scared that I'll always wonder if there's more she isn't telling me." His words hung heavy in the room. For the first time, Elena reached across the couch and took his hand. "I don't know how to make you believe me," she said softly, "but I'll keep trying, as long as it takes." The turning point came months later during a weekend getaway Elena planned as a gesture of reconciliation. They rented a cabin by the lake, far from the demands of work and family. On the first evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat on the dock, their feet dangling over the water. "I'm sorry," Elena said, breaking the silence. For what? Matthew asked, though he already knew. For everything, she said, her voice breaking. For letting things get so bad. For hurting you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it. Matthew looked at her, the vulnerability in her eyes cutting through his walls. I want to forgive you, he said. But it's going to take time. I'll wait, she whispered. Their journey to healing wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Over the next year, they rebuilt their relationship piece by piece, learning to communicate, to prioritize each other, and to let go of the past. Adrian became a distant memory, a shadow that no longer loomed over their lives. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Matthew and Elena renewed their vows in a quiet ceremony by the lake, the same place where they had begun to find each other again. As they exchanged rings, Matthew felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. This time, he said, his voice steady, I promise to never take you for granted. And I promise to never lose sight of what matters, Elena replied. They sealed their vows with a kiss, the weight of their past finally giving way to the promise of a brighter future. The weeks following their vow renewal were marked by a strange mixture of peace and uncertainty. For the first time in years, Matthew and Elena felt aligned in their efforts to rebuild their relationship. But trust was fragile, like fine china repaired with gold, beautiful but forever scarred. Matthew found himself hyper-aware of every detail in their interactions. He noticed the way Elena lingered over her morning coffee, staring out the window as if searching for something beyond their suburban yard. He paid attention to her phone, though she left it in plain sight now, and even offered to share its contents without him asking. Despite her openness, the questions still gnawed at him. Was it enough? Elena, for her part, tried to rediscover the version of herself she had lost somewhere between work, motherhood, and the affair that wasn't but almost was. She threw herself into her new job at a smaller firm where she no longer worked under Adrian's shadow. Yet the guilt lingered, and she often wondered if she was doing enough to atone for the hurt she had caused. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, Matthew broke the comfortable silence with a question that caught Elena off guard. "Do you miss him?" he asked. Elena looked at him, her brow furrowing. "Adrian?" Matthew nodded, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of something, anything, that might betray her. "No," she said softly but firmly, "I don't miss him. What I miss is the version of myself I became when I felt appreciated. But that wasn't real. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't what I needed." Matthew leaned back, processing her words. "I guess I'm afraid I'll never be enough for you." Elena reached for his hand, her grip gentle but resolute. "You've always been enough, Matt. I just forgot how to see it, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you to realize that." Time became their greatest ally. Months turned into a year, and the wounds of their near betrayal began to fade into the background, though they never truly disappeared. Matthew and Elena learned to live with their scars, using them as reminders of the fragility of love and its resilience. Their children noticed the change too. Olivia and Ethan no longer asked questions about their parents' arguments, because the arguments had all but stopped. Instead, there were quiet moments of unity, family movie nights, impromptu pancake breakfasts, and long walks in the park. One Saturday morning, as Matthew flipped pancakes in the kitchen, Olivia wandered in with her sketchbook. "Dad, can I draw you?" she asked. "Of course," Matthew said, smiling as he poured another dollop of batter onto the griddle. Olivia sat at the table, her pencil moving quickly across the page. After a few minutes, she looked up. "You and Mom seem happier now." Matthew paused, letting the words sink in. "We are," he said finally. "What changed?" she asked, her curiosity pure and unfiltered. Matthew thought for a moment before answering. "We remembered what was important." Life went on as it always does. Seasons changed, bringing new challenges and milestones. Ethan started soccer, and Olivia began exploring her talent for art with a passion that amazed them both. Elena received a promotion at her new firm, though this time she approached her success with more balance. She made a point to leave work on time, to be present for family dinners, and to make time for Matthew in ways she hadn't before. For Matthew, the wounds of mistrust slowly transformed into cautious faith. He stopped questioning Elena's every move and instead focused on rebuilding their intimacy, both physical and emotional. One evening, as they lay in bed, Elena turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we've made it?" she asked. Matthew chuckled. "What do you mean? Do you think we've fixed us, or is there always going to be this shadow hanging over everything?" Matthew considered her question carefully. "I think we've made it through the worst," he said. "But I don't think it's about fixing us. I think it's about choosing us, every day, even when it's hard." Elena smiled, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I can live with that." One afternoon, nearly 2 years after their vow renewal, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for their address scrawled in neat handwriting. Matthew opened it, his curiosity piqued. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made his blood run cold. "Matthew and Elena. I'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I know I crossed boundaries I shouldn't have, and I deeply regret the pain I caused your family. I wanted to apologize and wish you both the best in the future. You deserve happiness, and I hope you found it. Adrian." Matthew handed the letter to Elena without a word. Her face darkened as she read it. "What now?" she muttered. "I don't know," Matthew replied, his tone clipped, "but I'm not sure I care." Elena looked at him, her jaw tightening. "We've come too far to let him derail us again. I'll throw it away." "No," Matthew said, surprising himself. "Let's keep it, not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of how far we've come." Elena nodded, her eyes softening. She folded the letter and placed it in the back of their family photo album, a quiet testament to a chapter they had finally closed. As the years passed, their lives continued to evolve. Olivia graduated high school, her sketchbook now filled with stunning portraits that earned her a scholarship to a prestigious art school. Ethan grew into a confident teenager, his passion for soccer leading him to captain his school team. Matthew and Elena found new ways to grow together, from taking cooking classes to planning trips they had always dreamed of but never taken. The scars of their past remained, but they no longer defined them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together in the garden of their home, surrounded by family and friends. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Matthew looked at Elena, his heart full. "To us," he said simply. "Us." Elena echoed, her smile radiant. Their journey had been far from perfect, but it was theirs, and in the end, that was enough. The anniversary dinner was intimate, set in a candlelit gazebo at the edge of a serene lake. Matthew and Elena sat across from each other, the soft glow of lanterns reflecting in their glasses of wine. The evening air was crisp but not cold, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden nearby. 20 years? Matthew said, his voice warm with disbelief. "How did we get here?" Elena tilted her head, her lips curving into a soft smile. "One step at a time. And sometimes, one very stubborn argument at a time." Matthew chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "Do you remember the first fight we had? Over the couch?" Elena laughed, her hand instinctively reaching for his. "You insisted that hideous green monstrosity was comfortable. I wanted something chic. We ended up with something that neither of us liked." "It was awful," Matthew admitted, his thumb brushing against the back of her hand. "But I think that couch taught me one thing early on. Compromise." "Compromise," Elena echoed. "Something we both had to relearn." Matthew's expression grew serious, his gaze steady. "I don't think I've ever told you this, but I'm glad we fought for us. even when it felt impossible. Elena's eyes glistened and she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't give up on me when you had every reason to. I don't know if I'll ever be able to express how much that means to me." "You don't have to," Matthew said softly. "I feel it, every day." The waiter appeared then, placing a small dessert platter between them. At the center was a delicate chocolate cake adorned with a single lit candle. "Make a wish," Elena said, her voice playful but tinged with emotion. Matthew looked at her, the years of shared memories and struggles reflected in her eyes. "I don't need to," he said. "Everything I could wish for is sitting right here." Elena blinked, her breath catching at the sincerity of his words. "You always did know how to make me cry," she said, laughing softly as she wiped the corner of her eye. The candle flickered as they leaned in simultaneously, their lips meeting in a kiss that was neither rushed nor hesitant. It was a kiss that spoke of trust rebuilt, love reignited, and a bond stronger than it had ever been. As they pulled apart, Matthew smiled, his forehead resting against hers. "Here's to the next 20 years, he whispered. "And to every imperfect, wonderful day in between," Elena replied. The candle burned low as they lingered in the gazebo, their laughter mingling with the gentle rustle of the trees. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like an open sky, waiting for them to soar.